stink of diesel fumes hung in the July air as I scrolled through Airbnb listings on my cracked phone screen. My semi sat broken down on the shoulder outside Cleveland. That's me, Travis Grady, 46 years old with oil-stained knuckles and a back that pops like bubble wrap whenever I stand up straight. 23 years hauling everything from bedroom sets to carnival rides that make me wonder if I'm delivering death traps across state lines. For years I told myself trucking gave me freedom. No boss breathing coffee breath down my neck. No gray cubicle slowly stealing my soul. Only me, an empty highway, and truck stop coffee so bitter it could strip paint off a Chevy. But to be honest with you, freedom comes with a price tag, and mine had my daughter Allie's name written all over it. I still see her face the day I packed my duffel, confusion melting into something harder as she realized Daddy wasn't just leaving for another haul. I was leaving for good. Her 10th birthday present sat wrapped in princess paper on the kitchen counter, and I never even saw what was inside. That was years ago. Now my marriage was ancient history, and Allie might as well live on Mars. Classic deadbeat dad playbook. Run before you can screw up your kid any worse than you already have. The mechanic, a guy with fingernails black as midnight and breath reeking of Marlboros, had delivered the news with almost sadistic pleasure. Gonna cost you more than a kidney transplant, buddy. 3-day job minimum. But here's the sick joke. Even if you had the cash, which your type never does, I can't get the parts till Monday. He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice that landed inches from my boot. Cash or card? Clearly I needed a roof over my head for a few nights, but some local festival had every motel within 50 miles booked solid. And that's how I ended up staring at Quiet Farmhouse on Route 666, cheap cozy lodgings, through eyes that felt sandpapered raw, a half-eaten gas station burrito leaving grease stains on my jeans. The photos looked like they'd been taken with a flip phone from 2005. The description was bare bones. Just a warning to follow the house rules. Usually that means no smoking or keeping your muddy boots outside, right? I tapped book and punched the coordinates into my ancient GPS, the kind that still calls highways routes in that robotic female voice that sounds vaguely disappointed in your life choices. Little did I know what was waiting for me. As I turned onto Route 666, 50 miles outside Cleveland, the world got real quiet real fast. I've driven through Manhattan at rush hour and felt safer than I did on that deserted stretch. At least with road rage and taxi drivers cutting you off, you know what you're dealing with. My GPS barked at me to turn left onto a gravel path, and I nearly missed it. My headlights caught a busted wooden sign reading Private Road, half buried under weeds thick as my wrist. The gravel path was less road and more collection of potholes occasionally interrupted by loose rocks. After a kidney-punishing terrain, I spotted the farmhouse, a sagging structure that seemed held together by spite and termites. As I got closer, the strangest feeling washed over me, a feeling that the land was noticing me. You're just tired, Travis, I told myself. I parked near a withered oak tree that looked like it had been struck by lightning a few times too many. On the porch, a handwritten sign greeted me. Welcome, Travis. Follow the house rules. I froze. I hadn't given my name when booking. Credit card information, sure, but not my actual name. Just T. Grady. The front door wasn't locked, something that would have made me nervous in the city but seemed strangely normal out here in the middle of nowhere. I stepped inside, my steel-toed boots making the floorboards whine. Down the narrow hallway with its peeling floral wallpaper, family portraits lined the walls. Stern men with bushy mustaches and tight-lipped women in high-necked dresses, their eyes following me as I moved. I swear one old lady's hands changed positions when I wasn't looking directly at her. And I could have sworn one portrait, a young girl maybe 12 years old, looked exactly like Allie at that age, down to the small scar above her eyebrow from when she fell off her bike. Then, at the end of the hallway, pinned to the kitchen door, hung a paper with the same unsteady handwriting from the welcome sign. House rules. I expected the usual Airbnb stuff, checkout times, Wi-Fi passwords. Instead, I found, if the front porch light flickers more than twice, do not go outside, even if you hear someone calling your name. If you discover footprints leading from Route 666 into the backyard, do not follow them. Call the neighbor on the landline instead. Should a black dog scratch at the door, open it cautiously and offer it a slice of bread from the pantry. Do not try to pet it. Never sleep in the master bedroom. If you accidentally step inside, close the door behind you and leave it locked until dawn. If you hear the sound of dripping water from the basement, don't investigate. Write down your deepest regret on the notepad by the stairs, then tear out the page and burn it in the fireplace. Should you see your truck's headlights briefly flash from the driveway when you're inside, do not step out. It's not your truck waiting for you. If you hear children laughing after midnight, cover all mirrors with the sheets provided in the linen closet. When a storm comes, someone will knock precisely 3 times. You must answer by the 3rd knock, but do not open the door more than an inch. Speak only these words: the debt remains unpaid. My first thought was, I'd stumbled into some weird haunted house attraction, the kind that charges tourists $40 to walk through fake cobwebs, while teenagers in dollar store masks jump out at you. My throat felt like I'd swallowed the Sahara, so I walked to the kitchen. The faucet hacked up some brownish water that smelled like wet pennies. Hard pass. After digging through dusty cupboards, I found a half-empty bottle of spring water with a broken seal. Beggars can't be choosers when you're dying of thirst. But then, as I turned to head back from the kitchen, I heard a faint rattle of breath from somewhere deeper in the house. I followed the sound past the dining room to a small den I'd overlooked. The door was cracked open, a flickering lamp visible inside. And right there, lying on a tattered couch, was a man in his 30s, wearing jeans and a stained polo shirt. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, and definitely not breathing. Panic jolted through me as I rushed to check his pulse. Nothing. A notebook lay on the floor near his limp hand, open to a scribbled page. I can't eat. I can't sleep. The farmland has me. I broke too many rules. I tried to follow them at first, but I got so hungry, so desperate. The sentences trailed off into illegible scratches, like he'd lost all strength to hold the pen. Next to the couch sat a small trash bin overflowing with uneaten food, moldy sandwiches, crushed crackers. He seemed to have been physically unable to eat, or even stand. I backed away, knocking over a chipped vase. The clatter echoed through the silent den, and terror hammered at my ribs. Do I call the police? The neighbor? The landline was the only phone here, and something told me the farmland didn't take kindly to outsiders meddling. I retreated to the hallway, hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the water bottle. The words from that notebook burned into my brain. I broke too many rules. If I needed confirmation these rules were deadly serious, I'd just found it. If I'd had any sense, I would have grabbed my keys and bolted. But something about this place felt weirdly familiar. Not in a "I've been here before" way, but how the loneliness of the house echoed the hollow feeling in my chest. How the stale air reminded me of opportunities gone stale, and how the dead man in the den underscored what happens when you mess up. I dragged myself back to the guest room and collapsed onto the bed. The moment my head hit the pillow, memories ambushed me from all sides. Allie at 10, singing "Let It Go" in my pickup, her voice cracking on the high notes but her face so earnest it made my chest hurt. The mattress seemed to suck me down like quicksand. Guilt is heavy, heavier than any load I've hauled across state lines. Was Allie in college now? High school? I'd lost track. Last time I saw her, she still had braces and collected those little glass animal figurines. Did she still play soccer? Had her first heartbreak happened yet? Did she hate me? Or worse, had she just forgotten about me entirely? That's what I told myself to justify my silence all these years. Better she forget me than remember me with anger. I was good at making excuses, driving coast to coast, picking up loads and dropping them off. It was all just an elaborate dance to avoid admitting I had no clue how to be a father. or a husband for that matter. I tried to push these thoughts away. The house had gone quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood. Then, just as my eyelids started to droop, I heard it. A wet drip, drip, drip from somewhere below. The basement. At first, I tried to ignore the dripping. Probably just a leaky pipe, right? Nothing worth getting up for. But the sound grew louder, heavier, like someone had cranked open a faucet in the bowels of the house. My chest tightened as I remembered rule number 5. If you hear dripping water from the basement, don't investigate. Write down your deepest regret on the notepad by the stairs, then tear out the page and burn it. I peeked into the hallway, half expecting to see some spectral plumber floating there with a phantom wrench. Instead, I found exactly what the rules described. A battered notepad on a small table by the staircase, with a stubby pencil beside it. The basement door loomed at the end of the corridor, a black rectangle in the dim light. The dripping sound was so loud now it sounded as if someone was emptying buckets down there. The rules seemed like some new age therapy exercise. And well, I've got a long history of doing something stupid. But this time, the prickling fear crawling up my spine convinced me to play the game. So I picked up the notepad. Flipping it open, I saw pages filled with different handwriting, some neat, some barely legible. Confessions scrawled by other guests. One admitted to stealing from his dying mother's purse. Another described cheating with her sister's husband. A third confessed to leaving the scene of an accident where someone might have been hurt. With the pencil gripped tight, I found a blank page and wrote, I haven't seen my daughter in 7 years. I'm scared she hates me, and I'm terrified to face her. Even writing those words felt like carving them into my skin with a dull knife. Then I tore out the page with shaking fingers. Next came the second part. Burn it in the fireplace. I followed the corridor to a small sitting room with a stone hearth that looked older than the house itself. The fireplace was cold and empty, but neatly stacked logs sat ready, with a box of matches on the mantel. I touched the flame to the paper, watching as it curled and blackened, my confession turning to ash. The moment the last bit of paper disappeared, the dripping stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it rang in my ears. But as I turned to leave, the ashes in the fireplace began to shift and swirl. They rose into the air, forming letters that hung suspended for just a moment. Not enough. Before I could process what I was seeing, the ashes collapsed back into the grate. On rubbery legs, I made my way back to the guest room, fell onto the bed, and sank into sleep filled with fragments of dreams where Allie called my name from somewhere I couldn't reach. Morning arrived like an unwelcome houseguest. Sunlight stabbed through the blind's broken slats, illuminating dust motes swirling in the stale air. My back felt like I'd spent the night wrestling alligators, and my mouth tasted like I'd been gargling pennies. For a blissful moment, I doubted everything that had happened. The flickering porch light, the black dog, the dripping basement, and the terrible discovery of a dead man. Surely it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. Then I spotted the empty spot in the notepad where I'd torn out my confession. My phone read 7 a.m. I considered hitting the road immediately. I could be back on the highway by 7:30, ordering greasy eggs and burnt coffee at some truck stop by 8, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was in too deep already. Like a gambler who's lost his paycheck but keeps betting because surely the next hand will turn everything around. Plus, the Airbnb listing said checkout was at noon, and breaking that rule seemed like tempting fate. The farmhouse, the land around it, they felt alive somehow, watching me, waiting for me to slip up. I decided to at least check on my truck. The morning air hit me like a slap as I stepped onto the porch, cool and damp with dew. The porch light was still on, still flickering in broad daylight, which made about as much sense as snow in July. But the light wasn't what made my breath catch. Footprints. 2 sets of large, muddy footprints leading from the direction of Route 666, cutting across the property and disappearing behind the farmhouse into tall grass. Rule number 2 echoed in my head. If you discover footprints leading from Route 666 into the backyard, do not follow them. Call the neighbor on the landline. The footprints were fresh, the mud still wet at the edges. My skin crawled thinking about someone walking all that way in the dark, circling around to the back of the property. But there was something else about those footprints that made my blood turn to slush. One set was definitely made by work boots, the tread pattern clear in the mud. The other set, overlapping the first in places, was unmistakably barefoot and small, like a child's. Part of me, the part that makes me slow down to gawk at car wrecks, wanted to follow those footprints, see where they led. But I remembered the rule, and for once in my life, I decided not to do the stupid thing. Following mysterious footprints in a place like this is how you end up as the before photo in a missing persons case. I retreated back inside, swallowing my curiosity like a bitter pill. The phone in the kitchen was an ancient rotary model, the kind I hadn't seen since my grandmother's house when I was a kid. Above it, taped to the faded wallpaper, was a small piece of paper with a number, 213-555-0169. I frowned, recognizing the area code for Los Angeles, not rural Ohio. But who was I to question the logic of a place where dogs ate bread and basement pipes leaked confessions? It took 3 tries to get the hang of the rotary dial. My fingers too used to touch screens. The line crackled and popped like I was trying to call someone on the moon. Finally, a man's voice answered, gravelly as a dirt road. Yeah? Hi, I'm Travis, staying at the Airbnb down the... You found footprints from the highway? The voice cut me off mid-sentence. I blinked, caught off guard. Yes, the note said to call you. Adult and child? He asked, his voice tight with what sounded like dread. Yes. How did you... Shit. That's bad. Real bad. A pause, then a low chuckle that contained about as much humor as a funeral. Don't follow them. Let me guess, you're ignoring the other rules too. Heat rushed to my face. No, I'm trying to do everything right. Liar, he hissed, the words slicing through the static. The dripping started, didn't it? You wrote something down, something true but not true enough. The farmland knows when you're holding back, Travis. My mouth went dry. How did you know about... Keep doing that, he advised, his tone softening slightly. This place tests your secrets. People who fail, they vanish. Or worse. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean worse? You've seen him already, haven't you? The man in the den. That's the worse. Your mind trapped in a shell that can't move, can't eat, can't even scream as the farmland feeds on your regret drop by drop for eternity. My hands began to shake, the receiver slipping in my sweaty palm. What about the footprints? The child-sized ones. Listen carefully, he cut in, voice suddenly urgent. The farmland uses what you fear most, what you love most. Sometimes they're the same thing. Don't imagine for a second those prints belong to a real child. I need to get out of here. He laughed. No one leaves before the farmland is satisfied. Not even me. What do you mean? Who are you? The line went dead with a decisive click. I slammed the receiver down, my hand shaking. Tests your secrets. The words burrowed into my brain like parasites. Maybe the farmland had some sixth sense for guilt, the way sharks can smell blood in the water from miles away. As I stood there, the phone rang again. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Picking up, I heard a breathy voice. You need to leave, it hissed. None of us are innocent. Even the neighbor's not what he seems. The line cut off with a sharp crackle before I could ask who was speaking. But they'd planted a seed of suspicion. My mind swirled with the notion that the neighbor, the caretaker, might be complicit in more than simply offering cryptic advice. Could he have led other travelers astray? The call left me even more unsettled. I glanced at the kitchen window and froze. Outside, standing at the edge of the cornfield, was a man. Even from this distance, I could tell he was watching the house, watching me. I ducked away from the window, heart hammering against my ribs. With the footprints and the strange neighbor still swirling in my mind, I decided to explore the house, hoping to find some explanation for all the weirdness and some clarity on the man who'd died in the den. In a dusty living room with faded rose wallpaper, I spotted a battered trunk sitting under a window, the kind of antique that would sell for hundreds in those hipster vintage shops in Brooklyn. The trunk was secured with a padlock that looked as ancient as everything else in this place. After a bit of searching, I found a rusty key in a kitchen drawer, nestled among mismatched silverware and yellowed recipe cards. Why did I decide to pry? Because humans are curious creatures, and I'm worse than most. The key fit the padlock with a grudging screech of metal. Inside the trunk, I found a stack of yellowed documents, old letters with spidery handwriting, land deeds, black and white Polaroids of travelers with expressions ranging from confused to terrified. One letter had a line that made my blood run cold. Once the farmland tastes your guilt, it won't let go until it's repaid. We tried everything, offerings, confessions, even blood. Beware the black dog in the barn at the back, and beware the caretaker who pretends to guide, for he answers to a darker harvest. Barn at the back? The rules hadn't mentioned any barn, but I remembered glimpsing a sagging structure behind the cornfield last night, half hidden in shadows. Beneath the letters, I found something that made my heart stutter. A child's drawing done in crayon. It showed a stick figure man in a truck driving away from a small house. A stick figure child stood in the doorway, oversized tears falling from dot eyes. The child's name was scrawled at the bottom in awkward letters. Ali. My hands trembled as I set it aside. It couldn't be. This was impossible. Deeper in the trunk, I found a small wooden box. Inside was a silver locket on a tarnished chain. When I clicked it open, I nearly dropped it. The photo inside showed a young woman whose face was identical to my ex-wife Sarah, though the clothes and hairstyle suggested it was taken decades before she was born. Near the trunk sat a photo album bound in cracked leather. Inside, I found more photos of people who must have been previous renters. Some had scribbled notes beside their pictures, confessions of stealing, cheating, lying. One photo showed a man wearing a trucker cap not unlike my own. Pinned to it was a note that said, "He paid the farmland's price and left behind an empty shell." The next page was blank except for a caption, "The farmland demanded more." I tried to make a joke to myself. Well, at least it's not a timeshare presentation. But the words came out hollow, echoing in the empty room. My attempt at a smile felt more like a grimace. As I flipped through more pages, I found a Polaroid dated 1979 that showed the same man I'd spoken to on the phone. The caption read, "Daniel Henderson. Refused confession. Attempted escape. Now bound to the farmland as its caretaker." Next to it was a photo of a black dog with amber eyes, the caption simply reading, "His daughter." The implication hit me like a gut punch. The caretaker hadn't been warning me. He'd been grooming me to take his place. Was that the true price of the farmland? Not just confession, but eternal servitude? Around mid-morning, a soft knock at the front door nearly sent me through the ceiling. My heart jackhammered against my ribs as I peered through a dusty window. An elderly woman stood on the porch, wearing a shapeless dress that might have been fashionable when Kennedy was president. Her hair was a nest of gray curls that looked like they hadn't seen a brush in decades. She clutched a wicker basket in gnarled hands that reminded me of tree roots. The porch light flickered once but stopped short of a second flicker. That seemed like a good sign, right? Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain latched. "Morning," she said, her voice like sandpaper on wood. "You must be Travis." I forced a smile that felt more like a wince. "Yeah, how'd you—" She cut me off with a half-smile that never reached her eyes. "Word travels. You seen footprints, yes?" I hesitated. "The neighbor told you?" She shook her head, gray curls bouncing. "This farmland has eyes and ears, and it loves a fresh story." A chill snaked down my spine. I'm sorry. Who are you? Just a local. I brought some preserves. She lifted the basket, revealing jars of jam that looked homemade but ancient. The contents a deep red that reminded me uncomfortably of blood. Thought you might be hungry. I couldn't recall ordering breakfast with my Airbnb rental. Maybe she was just a sweet old lady with a side hustle. But something about her, the way she stood too still, the unblinking gaze, made alarm bells ring in my head. She fixed those unblinking eyes on me. You've fed the black dog, haven't you? My throat constricted like someone had wrapped a hand around it. No, haven't seen any dog. Her eyes narrowed. You're lying. The farmland hates liars. I'm not. Children lie, Travis. Adults evade. She leaned closer to the crack in the door. That dog belonged to a father who walked away from his family, she said softly. He regrets it, but regret alone doesn't fix what's broken. The daughter waited by the window for days, weeks. The farmland took pity on her, gave her a new form. Now she tests the fathers who pass through. Will they recognize their sin? Will they feed her when she's hungry? Or will they turn their backs, as you just did? My palms felt suddenly slick with sweat. How could she possibly know about my life? Look, I rasped. I'm just passing through. She nodded, not unkindly. They all say that. But this land, it draws in men and women who carry shame. The dog is a messenger, sniffing out the guilt. I swallowed, remembering the dead man in the den. There was someone else here. A renter, I think. He didn't make it. Her gaze flickered, a grim acknowledgement. He broke the rules one too many times, lost his will to eat, to move, until his breath simply stopped. The farmland allows no middle ground. What about the caretaker? Daniel Henderson? Her face hardened, age spots darkening against suddenly pale skin. How do you know that name? I found photos. He called me on the phone. Said he was trapped here. Daniel has chosen his punishment. The farmland offered him 3 paths: death, eternal servitude, or genuine atonement. He took the coward's way. What did he do? A shadow passed across her face. Ask him yourself. But remember, he wants company in his misery. He'll try to drag you down with him. Before I could figure out how to respond to that, she thrust a jar of strawberry jam at me. Take it. You'll need something sweet before the farmland sours your spirit. I stared dumbly at the jar, then accepted it. She gave a curt nod and walked off the porch with surprising agility for someone her age. Instead of heading toward the road, she walked straight into the cornfield, the stalk swallowing her without so much as a rustle. The porch light flickered once more as she vanished. I set the jam on the kitchen counter like it might explode if jostled. Part of me wanted to chuck it in the trash, but another part whispered, "The old woman isn't what you should be worried about. Focus on getting out of here with your sanity intact." But I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said about the dog. Had I already failed a test? The rules said to feed it bread, but I'd claimed I hadn't seen it. Another lie to add to my collection. At exactly noon, and I mean to the minute, like it had been scheduled, I heard an engine sputter outside. Through the window, I watched a beat-up sedan roll down the gravel path. The car looked like it had been through a demolition derby and lost badly. Dents in the doors, a cracked windshield, and one headlight hanging by what appeared to be duct tape. A man in a cheap suit stepped out, wiping sweat from a forehead that seemed to take up 2/3 of his face. He looked like every stereotypical traveling salesman from every bad movie. Slicked back hair thinning on top, a tie stained with what might have been last week's lunch. My gut twisted with fresh anxiety. Had the rules mentioned anything about random visitors? Just dog feeding and porch lights, right? I hesitated at the door, trying to remember if sleazy salesman appearing out of nowhere was a known harbinger of doom in ghost stories. But curiosity, my lifelong downfall, won out. I opened the door a crack. "Afternoon," he called with a smile that showed too many teeth. "Having car troubles. Any chance you've got water or a phone I could use? His request seemed innocent enough, but the way his eyes darted past me to inspect the house gave me goosebumps, like he was calculating its value down to the last nail. I forced a smile. Water's not great. Plumbing issues. He laughed, a sound like rusty nails in a blender. I'll take my chances. My name's Greg, by the way. Traveling salesman. He started up the porch steps. The light overhead flickered twice. My spine went rigid as I remembered the rule. If the porch light flickers more than twice, do not go outside, even if you hear someone calling your name. I wasn't planning to go outside, but he was definitely coming in, which seemed like the same danger in reverse. Could I trouble you for a glass of something? Greg persisted, now at the top of the steps. It's hotter than Satan's armpit out here. The porch light flickered a third time. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Actually, the well's contaminated. Health department warning. Sorry. He frowned, stepping closer. Is that your rig out there? Hauling, huh? Long hours, family at home? Or maybe not. His smile turned knowing, almost smug. His questions hit like precision strikes. Why focus on family? My skin crawled like it was trying to escape my body. I should go inside, I mumbled, stepping back. He pressed his palm against the door, stopping me from closing it. Listen, I know what this place is. I know what you're running from. I froze. What? I was like you once, he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Family man who couldn't handle it. Wife, kids, mortgage, the crushing weight of responsibility. I ran. Ended up here, just like you. What do you want? His eyes glittered with something that wasn't quite human. To offer you a shortcut. The farmland demands a sacrifice or genuine atonement. But there's a third option they don't tell you about. I'm listening. Substitution, he whispered. Find someone else to take your place. Someone carrying their own guilt. Lure them here. The farmland might accept the trade. My stomach churned. You want me to trick someone into coming here? That's... what? Immoral? He barked a laugh. You abandoned your own flesh and blood without a second thought. Don't act like you've got principles now. He leaned closer, his breath smelling of stale cigarettes and something metallic. Got a daughter, don't you? What's her name? Allie? I froze, ice replacing the blood in my veins. The porch light above us flickered frantically, like it was having a seizure. How did this stranger know about Allie? Did Daniel put you up to this? I demanded. Is this another test? The salesman's smile widened, showing too many teeth, some of them blackened at the gums. Daniel? That poor bastard's been trying to find a replacement for decades. No, I work independently. Been doing this since 1958. The farmland lets me leave occasionally to find fresh meat. It's a living. He winked obscenely. Better than driving trucks. Get out, I growled, disgust rising in my throat. Think about it, he pressed. You've got friends, right? Former colleagues? Someone who's done something they're ashamed of? All you need to do is make a call, suggest this charming Airbnb. Panic surged through me. I slammed my shoulder against the door with all my strength. He pushed back, but just then, a gust of wind roared across the porch, knocking over a rusted plant stand with a crash. Greg stumbled backward, momentarily distracted, and I seized the opportunity to slam the door shut and throw the deadbolt. Through the window, I watched him curse and dust himself off. He cast one more look at the house, no longer smiling, then got back in his dented sedan. Before driving away, he rolled down his window and called out, "The offer stands, Travis. Think about it. Everyone's got someone they could throw under the bus." Gravel sprayed in all directions as he peeled out of the driveway. I sank to the floor, back against the door, heart threatening to burst from my chest. The salesman had known about Allie. The farmland tests your secrets, the neighbor had said. The words echoed in my head like a warning bell. The worst part? For a split second, I'd actually considered his offer. Names had flashed through my mind. Other drivers who'd confessed shameful secrets on long hauls. My former boss who I suspected was embezzling. Even Sarah's brother who'd once made a drunken pass at my sister. The thought sickened me. But it had been there, like a cockroach scuttling across my consciousness. What kind of person even considers sacrificing someone else to save his own skin? The kind who abandons his family without a backward glance, a voice in my head whispered. The kind who misses his daughter's graduation because he's too scared to face her disappointment. The kind who drives past his hometown and doesn't even stop to say hello. After that unsettling encounter, I collapsed into an ancient armchair in the living room, trying to catch my breath. The house had gone quiet again. No flickering lights, no mysterious visitors. I stared at my reflection in a dusty mirror across the room. I looked like hell. Face gaunt, eyes bloodshot, 3 days worth of stubble making me look like a homeless person. The realization hit me like a slap. My guilt was practically a beacon drawing all this weirdness to me. The farmland sensed it. The black dog tracked it. The salesman used it against me. Maybe the whole place was some kind of supernatural magnet for people who couldn't face their failings. The photo album I'd found earlier lay open on the coffee table. I flipped through it again, noticing details I'd missed before. One Polaroid showed a woman clutching a teddy bear, tears streaking her mascara. Someone had scribbled beside it, "This place devours unspoken pain." Another photo showed those same muddy footprints leading away from the house. The caption read, "Footprints appear when you refuse to see what's right in front of you." The more I read, the more my head pounded. One line from that letter kept repeating itself. We tried everything. Offerings, confessions, even blood. Was that my future? Feeding stale bread to a phantom dog? Writing down my regrets like some twisted confessional? Spilling my own blood into this hungry soil? Over my dead body? Though given where I was, that might be exactly what the farmland wanted. As I flipped through more pages, a small newspaper clipping fluttered to the floor. I picked it up, my chest tightening as I read the headline, "Local man vanishes, daughter left alone." The article described how a truck driver named Thomas Garrett had disappeared in 1985, abandoning his 8-year-old daughter. The last place he'd been seen was a stretch of highway now known as Route 666. I felt sick. This was too specific, too targeted. The farmland wasn't just feeding on generic guilt. It was zeroing in on my particular brand of shame. And what made me even sicker was realizing that Thomas Garrett wasn't the first. The album contained similar stories. Fathers who ran, mothers who abandoned, children left behind. All drawn to this cursed patch of land, all forced to face their greatest failures. Night had fallen completely, turning the windows into black mirrors. The farmland outside was invisible, though I could hear cornstalks rustling in the breeze and frogs croaking somewhere in the distance. I'd locked all the doors, checked all the windows twice. My body ached for sleep, but my mind was wired like I'd mainlined truck stop coffee. Restless, I found myself wandering the hallway, realizing I'd never explored upstairs. Rule number 4 echoed in my head. Never sleep in the master bedroom. I had no intention of sleeping up there. The guest room was bad enough, but curiosity gnawed at me like a hungry rat. I climbed the stairs, each step complaining under my weight. The upstairs hallway was dark except for moonlight filtering through a window at the end. 2 doors stood to the left, 1 to the right, and at the very end, the master bedroom, its door distinguished by an ornate brass knob that gleamed in the moonlight like a cat's eye. My heart pounded faster as I approached. Just 1 peek, I told myself. What's the harm in looking? I noticed the door was already slightly ajar. As I drew closer, I heard a soft chirping sound from inside, like a phone notification. My scalp prickled. A memory flashed. Allie calling me years ago, leaving tearful voicemails I'd never bothered to return. With my pulse thudding in my ears, I nudged the door open a few more inches. Darkness filled most of the room, but I could make out a large bed with sheets half pulled off, exposing a mattress stained with something dark. The air wafting out smelled sour and stale, like unwashed sheets and something metallic. Blood? Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. Allie's voice as a child. "Dad? Are you there? Why won't you pick up? Mom says you're busy, but you promised to come to my recital." My stomach dropped like I'd just driven off a cliff. It was her exact voice from a voicemail she'd left 12 years ago, when she was 10 and still believed I might show up to her piano recital. I started to back away when a small light flickered on inside the room. A child's night light shaped like a crescent moon. It illuminated what lay on the nightstand. A framed photograph of me from years ago, holding a fishing rod and grinning at the camera. Next to it sat a Father's Day card, homemade, with macaroni glued to construction paper in the shape of a truck. "To Daddy" was written in a child's unsteady hand. These weren't just random artifacts. They were exact replicas of things Allie had made for me. Things I'd left behind when I walked out. "Come see what else I made for you, Daddy." Allie's voice called from deeper in the room. Everything in me screamed to slam the door and run. But something, guilt, curiosity, a desperate longing to see even a facsimile of my daughter, made me hesitate. That hesitation nearly cost me everything. A tiny hand, pale as milk, reached around the door's edge, fingers elongated and bent at unnatural angles. Not human. Not Allie. I stumbled backward, slamming the door with trembling hands. The rule said, if you accidentally step inside, lock it until dawn. I hadn't actually stepped inside, just peeked. But still, I turned the lock with a decisive click. Then I fled downstairs, adrenaline making me clumsy. I nearly broke my neck tripping over the last step. I'd barely reached the bottom of the stairs when the landline phone started ringing, shrill and demanding like a fire alarm. I snatched up the receiver, heart still racing from what I'd heard upstairs. "Hello?" I gasped. The gravelly voice from earlier responded immediately. "You opened the master bedroom door, didn't you?" My eyes darted around the dim hallway looking for hidden cameras. Not fully. A derisive snort crackled through the line. "Good enough. The house will be riled up now. Next time, curb your curiosity." I gritted my teeth, fear giving way to anger. "Who the hell are you?" A pause. "A caretaker of sorts. The farmland collects penance from those who owe. That bedroom has claimed more souls than you'd believe. Folks thinking they can waltz in, rummage around, then skip out scot-free. You want to leave in one piece? Don't do it again." My voice shook with rage. "You can't just let innocent travelers wander into this cursed place." He sighed, the sound like wind through dead leaves. "You're not innocent, Travis. The farmland drew you here because it senses your guilt. Deal with it, or it'll deal with you. What about you? That old lady said you've been trapped here for decades. What did you do, Daniel? What sin does the farmland hold over your head?" The line went silent for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, so quietly I had to strain to hear. "I was a lot like you once. Long-haul trucker, wife, daughter. I walked out on them in '79. 2 years later I got word my girl had died, drowned in the creek behind our house while my wife was working double shifts to make ends meet. My anger deflated like a punctured tire. "Jesus, I'm sorry." "Save it," he snapped. I drove straight here, half drunk and wild with grief. Somehow knew this was where I belonged. The farmland has a way of calling to its own. Been here ever since, guiding folks like you, hoping maybe someday I'll guide someone who actually learns from the lesson. So you've been... what? Testing me? Was that your salesman friend earlier? The one offering me a substitution? Not my friend, Daniel growled. Greg's been here longer than me. He's what happens when you choose the easiest path. The farmland gives you options: true atonement, eternal service, or betrayal of others. He chose betrayal, luring other guilty souls here to take his place. But the farmland is clever. It never actually releases him, just lets him think someday he'll be free. The line went dead with a decisive click. I slammed the receiver down so hard the plastic cracked, a fresh wave of fear and anger churning in my gut. Drew me here? That suggested this wasn't random bad luck, that something had singled me out, pulled me toward this nightmare like a fish on a hook. But as disturbing as Daniel's story was, at least it gave me hope. If the farmland accepted 3 forms of payment, atonement, service, or betrayal, then I still had choices. And unlike Daniel, my daughter was still alive. I could still make things right. The night deepened, and my patience wore thin. I decided I'd had enough. I'd leave at first light, checkout time be damned. But when I glanced out the window, I spotted a shape in the distance that made my blood run cold. A barn stood behind the house, its silhouette dark against the starry sky. How had I missed it during daylight? The half-moon gleamed off its rusted metal roof, and the door hung open like a gaping mouth. My mind flashed to that letter. Beware the black dog in the barn at the back, and beware the caretaker who pretends to guide. Common sense screamed at me to stay put. Going to investigate a creepy barn at night was exactly the kind of decision that gets people killed in horror movies. But each rule had been pulling me deeper into this place's mysteries, and the barn might hold answers. If the farmland thrived on guilt, maybe the barn was where it kept its trophies. A terrible guess, but I had to know. I grabbed a flashlight from my truck's glove compartment, ignoring the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my ex-wife saying, "This is how you die, you stubborn idiot." Outside, the air felt unnaturally still, like the farmland was holding its breath. The cornfield rustled as I passed, a whispered shh that sounded disturbingly like leave, leave, leave. Part of me, the rational part, wanted to sprint back to the house and barricade myself inside until morning. But I kept walking, drawn to the barn like a moth to a flame. Its silhouette grew larger, the open door a black rectangle against the weathered wood. The smell hit me first as I stepped inside. Mildew, rotting hay, and something metallic that made my nose wrinkle. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing empty stalls covered in cobwebs thick as cotton candy. Dust motes swirled in the light, disturbed by my presence after what seemed like years of stillness. At the back of the barn, I discovered what looked like a shrine. Items were pinned to the wooden beams with rusty nails, driver's licenses, photographs, handwritten letters, scraps of clothing. My stomach twisted as I realized this was a collection of confessions, a physical manifestation of the farmland's hunger for secrets. I approached slowly, scanning the macabre display. The handwritten notes made my skin crawl. I deserted my family because I was too weak to face my drinking problem. I stole $20,000 from my dying mother's savings. She never knew. I drove away after hitting someone with my car. I don't know if they lived or died. Each confession felt like a piece of someone's soul, nailed to this barn as a permanent reminder of their shame. And then I found something that made my blood freeze in my veins. A commercial driver's license with my name on it. My photo. My information. My eyes stared back at me from the laminated surface, wearing an expression I recognized all too well. The mask of someone pretending they weren't drowning in regret. With trembling fingers, I pried the license off the beam. How was this possible? How could my ID be here when I'd never set foot in this place before? A terrible thought struck me. What if the farmland had been calling to me long before I clicked on that Airbnb listing? What if I'd driven past perfectly good motels, subconsciously drawn to this place by some force that knew exactly what I was running from? The black dog materialized from the shadows, moving silently across the dirt floor. I nearly dropped my flashlight. The dog stopped a few feet away, amber eyes reflecting the beam. It whined softly, not threatening but almost expectant, like it was waiting for me to understand something important. I never fed you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. The dog tilted its head as if considering my words. It seemed to be waiting for more than an apology. Behind it, partially hidden in the shadows, I noticed a small cloth bundle. When I directed my flashlight at it, I realized it was a child's backpack, pink with unicorn patches sewn on, the kind Allie had carried in elementary school. A luggage tag dangled from one strap, the handwritten name clearly visible, Allie Grady. My throat closed up. This was beyond coincidence, beyond even supernatural manipulation. This was targeted, personal. Movement in the back of the barn caught my attention. A figure stepped out from behind a stall, a man in a heavy work coat despite the summer heat. His face was creased like old leather, eyes deep set beneath bushy eyebrows. I recognized his voice before he spoke. The neighbor, the caretaker, the man from the phone. Daniel Henderson. He gestured toward the wall of pinned secrets. We all end up here eventually. My voice cracked. Why? What the hell do you want from me? His gaze flicked to the black dog, which had settled on its haunches, watching us with those unblinking eyes. It's not about what I want, Travis. The farmland demands penance from those who carry guilt. Think of it as a living entity, feasting on secrets. I clutched my driver's license so hard the plastic cut into my palm. I've been burning regrets in the fireplace, feeding the dog bread. What else am I supposed to do? He sighed, shoulders sagging slightly. You've only scratched the surface. The farmland needs a real sacrifice or a genuine atonement. That's the final bargain. My stomach dropped. Sacrifice? Like blood? Not your blood, he said. The farmland wants what matters most. Your attachments, your future possibilities. What does that mean? Give up hope of reconciliation, he said bluntly. Surrender the very idea of seeing your daughter again. Sign over your soul to the farmland, like I did. Become its servant. Let go of Allie completely. I stumbled back a step. That's monstrous. Is it? A cruel smile twisted his lips. You've already stayed away 7 years. What's forever? She's moved on without you anyway. His words stung because they carried a grain of truth. Anger flared in my chest. Or what? Genuine atonement, you said. That's my other option, right? He looked almost disappointed. Yes. You call the person you wronged. You do everything in your power to make it right. Face your shame head on. That might appease the farmland, but it's no guarantee. My throat constricted. The idea of calling Allie, hearing her adult voice, possibly filled with anger or worse, indifference, terrified me more than any supernatural threat. And if I refuse both options? He spread his hands in a gesture of resignation. Then you become part of the farmland's collection. Another pinned relic. Another story whispered about Route 666. The dog whined again, more insistently this time, as if urging me toward the honest path. But a dark thought crossed my mind. Some unforgivable act that would let me escape, physically unharmed but morally bankrupt. It horrified me that I even considered it for a moment. But fear and desperation can make monsters of ordinary men. There's something you're not telling me, I said slowly. Why are you still here? If atonement works, why didn't you try it? Daniel's eyes hardened. Because my daughter is dead. There's no one left to apologize to. What about your wife? He looked away. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. You're lying, I said, sudden certainty flooding through me. The old lady said you chose eternal servitude. You could have chosen atonement, even with your daughter gone. His face contorted with a flash of rage that transformed his features into something barely human. What do you know about it? You think a simple, I'm sorry, fixes abandoning someone who needed you? Words are cheap, Travis. Actions are what matter. So why push me toward servitude? Why not encourage me to make things right? He smiled, a hollow expression that didn't reach his eyes. Misery loves company, and the farmland rewards me for each new caretaker I recruit. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Daniel wasn't trapped here against his will. He was complicit, working with the farmland, feeding it new victims to avoid facing his own demons. The old woman was right. He'd chosen the coward's path. "You're no better than Greg the salesman," I said quietly. "Both of you trying to drag others down to avoid your own punishment." Daniel's face darkened with fury. "You don't know what it's like to lose a child, to carry that weight." "No," I cut him off. "But I know what it's like to lose yourself. That's what happened to you, isn't it? You lost your humanity piece by piece, confession by confession, until there was nothing left but this shell working for the farmland." The dog barked once, sharply, as if in agreement. I backed away from Daniel, nearly tripping over a rusted pitchfork lying on the ground. The barn seemed to swirl around me, confessions pinned to beams, the black dog's soft panting, the caretaker's calm, knowing gaze. My mind spun with terrible possibilities. "Look," I rasped, "I can't just do something evil to save my own skin." He nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "So call your daughter." My voice cracked like brittle plastic. "She hates me." He shrugged, unmoved. "Doesn't matter. The farmland thrives on the confrontation, not the outcome. The raw honesty." A memory crashed over me like a wave. Allie's tear-filled eyes the last time I saw her, her small voice saying, "You never even try, Dad. You're always running." I realized with a sick feeling that terrifying farmland and cursed barns felt easier to handle than a single honest conversation with my own child. Daniel stepped aside, revealing something I hadn't noticed before. A dusty landline phone mounted on the barn's rear wall, identical to the one in the house. I stared at it in disbelief. His expression told me this wasn't optional. I could almost feel the farmland holding its breath, waiting for my decision. "This is a trick," I said. "How do I know this call connects to the real Allie and not some farmland illusion?" "You don't," Daniel admitted. "Faith is part of redemption." For the first time, the dog made direct eye contact with me, and in those amber depths, I saw something disturbingly human. Intelligence, sadness, and what might have been encouragement. Daniel noticed the exchange. "She won't wait forever, you know. The dog, the farmland, your daughter. Time passes differently here, but it does pass." I glanced back at the wall of confessions, wondering how many men and women had stood exactly where I was standing, faced with the same impossible choice. How many had chosen servitude or substitution over the terrifying prospect of genuine apology. "If this is a trick," I growled, "if this call goes to something pretending to be Allie, then what?" Daniel smirked. "You'll leave a bad Yelp review for the haunted farmhouse?" I flipped him off and stalked toward the phone. Each step toward the phone felt like wading through quicksand. The black dog followed at my heels, its nails clicking softly on the dirt floor. Daniel stood with arms folded, watching me like a teacher monitoring an exam. I picked up the receiver, surprised to find it warm against my ear, like someone had just been using it. Silence, then a dial tone that echoed through the barn like a funeral bell. My fingers trembled as I dialed Allie's number, the same one I'd memorized years ago but never had the courage to call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. She won't answer, I told myself. She screens unknown numbers, she always has. But on the 5th ring, a click. "Hello?" Her voice. Deeper now, more mature but unmistakably Allie. My throat closed up completely. "Allie?" I finally managed. Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Then cautiously, "Who is this?" I drew a ragged breath that felt like inhaling broken glass. "It's Dad." She inhaled sharply, the sound crackling through the connection. "Dad? Are you okay? How did you even—" I glanced at Daniel, who nodded for me to continue. The black dog whined softly at my feet. No, I'm not okay. I'm in Ohio, near a place I shouldn't be. I need to say I'm sorry. I know I was never there for you." I know you probably hate me, and you have every right. The silence that followed stung worse than any verbal assault could have. Finally, she said, "You're not calling because you're dying, are you? Because that's the only reason I can think you'd break the silence after all this time." Guilt slammed into me like a physical force, nearly buckling my knees. I might be, not literally, but I messed up, Allie. I can't keep running from it. I want to see you. I want to try again, if you'll let me. She breathed into the phone for a moment. I dot. Another pause. Why now? After all these years? My gaze fell on the wall of pinned confessions, driver's licenses, photos, letters scrawled in desperation. Because the road demanded it, I said softly, aware of how insane that sounded. Because I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. She let out a shaky laugh that bordered on tears. I tried calling you so many times. You never picked up. Do you have any idea how that felt? My eyes burned with unshed tears. I can guess, but that doesn't lessen the pain I caused. I'm sorry, kiddo. I'm so sorry. Behind me, Daniel made a subtle gesture to continue. The black dog stared up with those amber eyes that seemed to see right through me. The barn itself seemed to tremble slightly, as though the farmland was hungry for every painful syllable. Allie, I continued, voice breaking, I'm going to do better. I can't promise perfection, but I promise honesty. Let me at least see you, or talk again. I love you. Her breath hitched audibly. You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that, she whispered. Then she cleared her throat, composing herself. Fine. Call me tomorrow, for real. If you flake, that's it. I'm done forever. Emotion lodged in my throat like a fist. I understand. I won't flake. We lingered in silence, neither wanting to end the call. Eventually, she said, I'm in college now. Psychology major. Mom remarried 3 years ago. Life moved on. I swallowed hard. I get that, and I'm proud of you no matter what. I'm sorry for missing it all. She inhaled sharply, as if steadying herself. Just call me tomorrow, okay? 4 p.m. I have a break between classes then. 4 p.m., I promise. And Dad? Her voice caught slightly. The present you left, that last day? It was a locket with a picture of us fishing at Lake Harmony. I still have it. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. She'd kept it all these years, a token from the father who ran. She hung up, leaving me trembling. Daniel exhaled slowly, stepping forward to place a weathered hand on my shoulder. The farmland around us went unsettlingly still, like the air molecules had frozen in place, waiting for some final verdict. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought that might be enough, that the phone call had satisfied whatever dark hunger drove this place. Then the barn began to shake. The wooden beams groaned like they were being stretched to breaking point. The pinned confessions fluttered like butterfly wings. A low rumble vibrated through the floorboards, making my teeth chatter. Daniel cursed under his breath, stepping back. It's not done with you yet, he warned, eyes widening. The black dog barked once, ears flattened against its skull. A whirlwind erupted from nowhere, sending papers and photos flying in a macabre tornado. The phone crackled with static, spitting sparks. Daniel shouted something I couldn't make out over the roar, but his eyes said one thing clearly. Get out now. I bolted for the barn door, ducking flying debris. The black dog raced alongside me, whining in what sounded like alarm. Daniel vanished in the chaos, swallowed by shadows and flying paper. The farmland howled like a wounded animal. All I could think was, I did what it wanted. I confronted the guilt. So why is it angry? I burst outside, stumbling across the yard. To my shock, the night outside was eerily calm, stars twinkling overhead, crickets chirping in the grass. No wind, no earthquake, just the barn behind me, which had fallen suddenly silent. I gasped for air, expecting the ground to crack open and swallow me whole. But everything remained still, like nothing had happened. I turned back to look at the barn, only to see Daniel emerging, brushing dust from his coat. His expression was unreadable in the moonlight. "What the hell was that?" I demanded. He shrugged, an oddly casual gesture after the chaos we'd just witnessed. "The farmland weighing your confession, deciding if it was genuine. And, hard to say." He glanced toward the house. "Go back inside. The test isn't over yet." "Test? You never mentioned any test." His lips twitched in what might have been a smirk. "Wouldn't be much of a test if you knew about it in advance, would it?" The black dog trotted between us, circling my legs once before heading toward the house. Its message was clear: follow. Before I could ask Daniel any more questions, he melted back into the shadows of the barn, leaving me alone with the dog and my doubts. I staggered back to the farmhouse and collapsed onto the porch steps, clothes soaked with sweat that had nothing to do with the summer night. The black dog materialized beside me, sitting calmly as if we were old friends taking an evening breather. I stared at it, my fear gradually giving way to a strange sense of kinship. It had guided me somehow, or at least hadn't tried to harm me. "You're Daniel's daughter, aren't you?" I whispered. Somehow. The dog's ears perked up, but otherwise it gave no sign of understanding. "I'm sorry for what happened to you, for what your father did." I hesitated, then added, "And for not feeding you bread when I was supposed to." The dog's tail swished once against the wooden boards of the porch, a sound as soft as a whispered forgiveness. Its ears suddenly perked up. I followed its gaze to see a faint glow at the edge of the cornfield, twin beams like headlights. My truck's headlights, seemingly shining from the backyard, which made zero sense since I'd parked it in the front. Rule number 6 flashed in my mind. Should you see your truck's headlights flash from the driveway when you're inside, do not step out. It's not your truck waiting for you. I wasn't technically inside the house, but the warning still applied. This was another illusion, another trap. The light flickered once, twice, beckoning like a finger curling an invitation. The black dog growled low in its throat, a primal warning that raised the hair on my arms. I'd had enough of this place's games. I marched inside, locked the door behind me, and drew the curtains, shutting out the phantom glow that had no business being there. But as I turned from the window, I noticed something I'd overlooked before. A small framed photo on the mantelpiece. It showed a man who looked disturbingly like me, arm around a teenage girl whose features reminded me of Allie. Their clothes and the photo quality suggested it had been taken decades ago. I picked it up, heart racing. The back bore a handwritten note. Tom and Anna, 1965. Another case of the farmland finding someone like me? Or proof that this cycle of guilt, regret, and punishment had been playing out long before I arrived? I set the photo down with shaking hands. The question that had been nagging at me since Daniel revealed his true role hit me with fresh urgency. Why had the farmland drawn me here specifically? What made me different from the thousands of other deadbeat dads out there? A chill ran down my spine as I realized the possible answer. Maybe I wasn't meant to be just another victim. Maybe, like Daniel, I was being groomed for a more permanent role. At exactly midnight, according to the ancient clock in the hallway that hadn't worked when I arrived but was now ticking steadily, a knock came at the front door. 3 slow, deliberate taps, each one louder than the last. Then a voice, soft and pleading. "Travis? It's Allie. Let me in." My blood turned to slush in my veins. I'd just spoken to Allie on the phone. She was hundreds of miles away at college. The voice outside sounded almost right, but not quite. Like someone doing a convincing impression, but missing subtle inflections. The porch light flickered once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Rule number 1 echoed in my head. If the porch light flickers more than twice, do not go outside, even if you hear someone calling your name. My throat closed up as the voice grew more desperate. "Dad, please. I drove all night to surprise you. It's dark out here." I pressed my hands over my ears like a child trying to block out thunder. This was the farmland's cruelest trick yet, exploiting my deepest vulnerability. "Don't open the door," I chanted silently. "It's not really her." The knocking intensified, becoming a furious pounding. "Dad, I'm sorry I was angry on the phone. Just let me in." The voice warped slightly, shifting between Allie's tone and something else, sometimes sounding like the traveling salesman, sometimes like my ex-wife, sometimes like a chorus of whispers. I retreated from the door, ignoring the furious pounding that made the hinges rattle. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the noise ceased abruptly. The porch light settled back to its standard dull flicker. Nausea rolled through me at how close I'd come to opening that door. As the silence stretched, I began to wonder if I'd passed another test. Then a soft scrabbling came from the kitchen, nails clicking on linoleum. The black dog had somehow gotten inside. I found it sitting patiently by the pantry door, amber eyes fixed on me with that eerie intelligence. Understanding dawned. This was the test mentioned in Rule 3. The dog had come inside, and I was supposed to feed it bread. I opened the pantry and found, as promised, a loaf of bread that hadn't been there earlier. It looked homemade, crust golden brown, untouched by mold despite the house's general decay. The dog watched expectantly as I tore off a slice. "Here," I said, offering it palm up. "I'm sorry I didn't do this earlier." The dog delicately took the bread, its teeth never touching my skin. It chewed slowly, methodically, eyes never leaving mine. When it finished, it bowed its head once, a gesture so human it sent chills down my spine, then turned and trotted toward the back door, which swung open of its own accord to let the animal out. I didn't know what to make of the encounter. A simple rule followed, or something more significant. The old woman's words echoed in my mind. That dog belonged to a father who walked away from his family. He regrets it, but regret alone doesn't fix what's broken. Something told me the dog would return before my time here was done. Sleep eluded me that night. I sat in the armchair near the fireplace, listening to the house settle around me. Phantom creaks and groans that might have been the wind, or might have been something less natural. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps on the porch. Not the frantic pounding from earlier, but the measured tread of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The front door opened without a knock or key, and Daniel stepped inside, shaking raindrops from his coat, though the night outside had been clear when I last looked. "You're still awake," he observed. "Good. What do you want?" I asked, too tired for politeness. He reached into his pocket and produced a flask, taking a swig before offering it to me. "Dutch courage. You'll need it." Against my better judgment, I accepted. The liquid burned going down, warming my chest with what tasted like very old whiskey. Daniel sank into the chair opposite mine, the ancient springs protesting under his weight. For a long moment, he stared into the dying embers of the fire. "You passed tonight's tests," he finally said. "The truck, the false alley, the dog. The farmland is satisfied with your performance." "I'm thrilled," I muttered. "What happens now?" Daniel's face remained impassive. "You have a choice to make. Leave in the morning, fulfilling your promise to call your daughter at 4 p.m. or..." He studied his weathered hands. "Stay. Become the new caretaker." I barked a laugh. Why the hell would I choose to stay? "Because the farmland can't guarantee you'll make it to that phone call if you leave," he said flatly. "Or that your daughter will pick up if you do. Or that she'll forgive you even if she answers. The world outside is cruel, Travis, full of coincidences that shatter good intentions. And if I stay, the farmland promises safety, structure. You'll guide others like yourself, lost fathers searching for redemption. Most will fail, but some might succeed where you and I could not." I leaned forward. "What do you mean, where I could not?" I made the call. I apologized. Daniel's eyes took on a distant look. Words are easy. Following through is hard. How many times have you promised to change, Travis? How many times have you sworn that this time would be different? I flinched as his words hit their mark. "The farmland sees through our lies," he continued. even the ones we tell ourselves. It knows whether your apology was genuine or just another escape attempt. It was genuine, I insisted, but doubt crawled through my mind like cockroaches in a dark kitchen. Was it really? Or had I just been desperate to escape? Daniel sighed. Then prove it. Leave tomorrow, make your call, rebuild what you destroyed. Or stay and serve. The farmland will be watching your decision closely. What happens to you if I choose to leave? A shadow crossed his face. Not your concern. What happened to your daughter? I pressed. The black dog. Is that really her? Daniel's expression hardened. Some questions shouldn't be asked. I think they should, I insisted, a sudden wave of anger giving me courage. I think you've been lying to me about a lot of things. About what this place really is. About what it wants. Be careful, he warned, voice dropping to a growl. Accusing the caretaker of deception isn't wise. Why not? I challenged. What more can this place do to me? A slow, terrible smile spread across Daniel's face. You have no idea what the farmland is capable of. No idea what it's already done to you. What's that supposed to mean? He stood, looming over me in the dim light. Think about it, Travis. How did the farmland know so much about Allie? About your specific guilt? The locket in the bedroom, the crayon drawing in the trunk, exact replicas of things from your past. A sick feeling spread through my gut. You're saying the farmland can read minds? I'm saying time works differently here. I'm saying maybe this isn't the first time you've come to this farmhouse. Maybe you've been here before, made promises before, broken them before. My head spun with the implications. That's not possible. I'd remember. Would you? He asked softly. Or would those memories be conveniently missing? Like so many other inconvenient truths in your life. How many times have you driven past your daughter's exit, Travis? Are you sure it was always just cowardice that kept you away? Or something darker? Something that wanted you here instead? I shook my head, refusing to believe what he was suggesting. You're trying to manipulate me into staying, into taking your place. Am I? He moved toward the door. Check your wallet, Travis. Look at your driver's license. With trembling hands, I pulled out my wallet, flipped it open to the plastic window where I kept my license. The face staring back at me was my own, but the issue date made my blood freeze. July 15th, 1985. Nearly 40 years ago. That's not possible, I whispered. That can't be right. Daniel's expression held something like pity. Time loops here, Travis. The farmland pulls in what it needs, when it needs it. Your daughter is waiting for your call, she always is. But how old is she really? How many times have you promised to call and forgotten? The farmland remembers, even when you don't. He opened the front door, letting in a gust of wind that smelled of rain and corn. Dawn's coming soon. Make your choice. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty house. When dawn finally broke, casting pale light through the dusty windows, the farmland seemed eerily peaceful. No flickering lights, no phantom voices, no scratching dogs. I threw my few belongings into my duffel bag, determined to leave this nightmare behind. But Daniel's parting words haunted me. I pulled out my wallet again, heart pounding as I checked my license. The issue date now read 2022. Normal, recent, exactly what it should be. Had I imagined the earlier date? Or had the farmland been playing yet another mind game? Stepping onto the porch, I noticed the light bulb clicked off for the first time since my arrival. The air felt lighter somehow, almost hollow. My truck sat in the driveway looking normal enough. No mysterious headlights, no dents that hadn't been there before. I approached cautiously, half expecting it to transform into something monstrous. But when I slid into the driver's seat and turned the key, the engine purred to life without protest. No flickering dashboard lights, no radio turning on by itself. I glanced in the rearview mirror at the sagging farmhouse. Part of me wanted to douse it in gasoline and strike a match, watching it burn to ashes. But somehow I knew it wasn't just the house. The entire farmland was alive, conscious. Destroying the structure wouldn't kill whatever presence haunted this patch of earth. As I drove down the gravel path, I spotted Daniel standing by the orchard, arms crossed over his chest. He gave me a curt nod that felt more like acknowledgement than farewell. The black dog sat at his feet, watching me pass with those knowing amber eyes. I felt no hostility from them, only a solemn recognition, like doctors who'd seen a patient through a difficult surgery. I paused at the end of the driveway, rolling down my window. "Tell me the truth," I called out. "What happens now?" Daniel approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "That depends on you. If you keep your promise, call your daughter, make amends, maybe nothing. Maybe the farmland lets you go with its blessing. And if I don't?" A shadow passed over his face. "Let's just say the farmland has ways of reminding you of your obligations. Ways you won't enjoy. Why help me at all? I thought you wanted me to stay and take your place." He looked away, eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the cornfield. Maybe I'm tired of watching the same mistakes repeat themselves decade after decade. Maybe I want one soul to break the cycle. "What about your daughter? The dog?" His expression hardened. "Some bonds can never be broken, Travis. Not even by death. Remember that when you're tempted to break your word again." With that cryptic statement, he turned and walked away, the black dog trotting at his heels. I watched until they disappeared into the cornfield, then put the truck in gear and drove away from the farmhouse, hoping never to see it again. I merged back onto Route 666, tensed for some final supernatural ambush. Instead, the sun rose in a brilliant display of pink and gold, birds singing in the trees as if nothing unusual ever happened here. If not for the dryness in my mouth and the trembling in my hands, I might have convinced myself it had all been an exhaustion-fueled hallucination. But as I put miles between myself and that farmhouse, a new anxiety took root. I'd promised Allie I'd call her again today at 4 p.m. This was a real-world obligation, scarier than any black dog or flickering light. Would I keep my word, or fall back into old patterns of avoidance and silence? My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text message appeared on the screen. "Hey, Dad. Thanks for calling last night. It meant a lot. Talk later?" My heart soared and plummeted simultaneously. She was reaching out, offering a lifeline I didn't deserve but desperately wanted. All I had to do was grab it and hold on. Yet a voice in my mind, sounding disturbingly like Daniel, whispered, "What if you let her down again? What if disappointment is all you have to offer?" It felt like the farmland's presence lingering, reminding me that guilt is a chain we forge ourselves, link by painful link. Another text came through. "Don't forget, 4 p.m. I have a 30-minute break between classes." I swallowed hard, tapping out a quick reply. "I won't forget. Talk to you then." As I drove, memories of the farmhouse began to blur around the edges, like a dream fading upon waking. Only the obligations remained crystal clear. The call at 4 p.m., the promise to do better, the chance at redemption I'd been given against all odds. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 10:17 a.m. 6 hours until the call. 6 hours to gather my courage, plan what to say, figure out how to rebuild a relationship I'd shattered through years of neglect. 6 hours that suddenly seemed both an eternity and not nearly enough time. I stopped for gas about 40 miles from the farmhouse, pulling into a standard roadside station with a convenience store that smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. As I filled the tank, I overheard two other truckers chatting by the next pump. "Where'd you stay last night?" one asked, adjusting his cap. "At Econo Lodge just outside Cleveland," the other replied, unfolding a map. "Pretty decent for $39. There's at least 3 motels in that stretch." I froze, gas nozzle still in my hand. 3 motels? I hadn't seen a single vacancy last night. I leaned over slightly, eyes landing on their map. Sure enough, there were several budget motels clearly marked along the route I'd taken. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been drawn to the farmhouse. On some subconscious level, I had chosen to ignore normal lodging options, pulled toward the farmland's domain like a nail to a magnet. The caretaker was right. The farmland was right. My guilt had been the beacon guiding me there all along. I stumbled into the convenience store, grabbing a bottle of water with shaking hands. The cashier, a teenager with blue-streaked hair and concerned eyes, gave me an odd look. "You okay, mister? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed, the sound catching in my throat. "Yeah, just had a rough night." "Must have been some night," she murmured, making change. Her words sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Did I really look that different? I caught my reflection in the security mirror behind the counter and barely recognized the haggard man staring back. Deeper wrinkles bracketed my mouth and strands of gray had appeared in my hair overnight. "Weird question," I asked the cashier. "But what's the date today?" She raised a pierced eyebrow. "July 16th. My heart skipped a beat. "What year?" Now she looked genuinely concerned. 2023, man. You sure you're okay to drive?" I nodded mechanically, mumbling thanks as I stumbled back to my truck. July 16th, 2023. Exactly the date it should be. So why did I feel like I'd lost time somewhere? Why did I look older than I had yesterday? Daniel's words echoed in my mind. Time loops here, Travis. The farmland pulls in what it needs, when it needs it. As I walked back to my truck, I felt a strange sensation of being watched. Turning, I spotted a black dog sitting across the parking lot, observing me with eerie stillness. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be the same dog. I was miles from the farmhouse, but those amber eyes seemed to hold the same knowing intelligence. When I blinked, the dog was gone. That afternoon, I pulled into a motel parking lot, a boring chain motel with plastic plants in the lobby and a desk clerk who barely looked up from his phone. I paid for a room without haggling over the price, desperate for normality. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Scratchy bedspread, air conditioner that rattled like it was about to take flight, TV with basic cable. For once, I welcomed the mundane. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I stared at my phone, trying to build up courage to call Allie. Part of me still wanted to run, to throw the phone away and disappear into another long-haul route. But the farmland's memory was burned into my brain. If I kept running, I'd never be free of that guilt. It would follow me like the black dog, patient and persistent. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:58 p.m., 2 minutes until our scheduled call. My palms sweated as I rehearsed what to say for the 100th time. No excuses, no self-pity, just honesty and a willingness to listen. 3:59 p.m. My finger hovered over her contact. 4 p.m. exactly. I pressed call. 1 ring, 2, 3. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Hello?" Her voice cautious but expectant. "Hey, Allie, it's me. I'm calling. Like I promised." A pause. "I wasn't sure you would." We talked for nearly an hour. It wasn't easy. Like walking through a minefield where every step might trigger an explosion of old hurts. She told me about her psychology classes, how she'd chosen that major to understand why people do the things they do. I heard the unspoken question, "Why did you leave, Dad?" I had no good answer, just honest ones. I was scared, I admitted. Not of you or your mom, but of failing you, of not being good enough. So I ran before I could mess up even worse. "That's pretty messed up logic," she replied, but without the heat I'd expected. "Running was the ultimate failure, you know." "I know that now," I said quietly. Took me too long to figure it out. By the end of the call, I felt lighter, like I'd set down a steel beam I'd been carrying for years. A fragile thread of hope flickered in my chest. Not redemption, not yet, but the possibility of it. The chance to try. "Can I call again tomorrow?" I asked. A hesitation then. Yes, same time works. After hanging up, I lay back on the motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of peace. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, not by a long shot, but because I'd finally stopped running. The phone buzzed with a text notification. I expected it to be from Allie, maybe a postscript to our conversation. Instead, it was from an unknown number. Well done, Travis. The farmland is pleased. For now. I frantically deleted the message, as if erasing the words could somehow break the farmland's connection to me. But deep down, I knew better. I'd made a promise to the farmland as surely as I'd made one to Allie, and something told me it would be watching to make sure I kept it. A few days later, I found a local trucking job that kept me within a 3-state radius instead of coast to coast. I needed stability if I was going to rebuild any kind of relationship with Allie. We arranged to meet in person the following month. Neutral territory, a coffee shop near her campus. The thought terrified me, but it was a good kind of terror, like standing at the edge of a diving board. But at night, when I closed my eyes, I still heard the farmland's whispers. In dreams, I stood in that barn again, confessions swirling around me like autumn leaves in a windstorm. I'd wake gasping, half expecting to see muddy footprints tracking from some distant highway to my bed. But morning light always banished those phantoms, at least until sunset. I wondered if the farmland had marked me somehow, branded my soul with an invisible sigil, or if it simply let me go once it had tasted enough of my guilt. Perhaps all it really wanted was honesty, forcing me to face what I'd spent years running from. A twisted gift in its way. A week after leaving the farmhouse, I received a small package at my new apartment. No return address, just my name scrawled in familiar handwriting. The same unsteady script from the house rules. Inside was a jar of strawberry jam, identical to the one the old woman had given me, along with a note. A reminder of sweetness in the midst of bitterness. Don't forget what you promised. The sight of that jam jar sent a jolt of fear through me. The farmland was still watching, still waiting. But instead of throwing the jar away, I placed it on my kitchen shelf. A reminder not of supernatural horror, but of the very human consequence of breaking promises. 6 months passed. I was doing better, not perfect, but better. Allie and I had weekly phone calls, sometimes awkward, sometimes surprisingly easy. My ex-wife Sarah remained distant but civil, allowing me to attend Allie's birthday dinner, a small step but significant. Life was gradually finding a new rhythm, one without supernatural farmhouses or bread-eating black dogs, until one afternoon, returning from a delivery, I pulled into a roadside diner for coffee. As I sat at the counter nursing a mug of something that tasted like it had been brewed last week, a black shape crossed the highway outside. My mug froze halfway to my lips. It was the black dog trotting along the shoulder of the road, completely ignoring the traffic speeding past. For a brief moment, our eyes met through the diner window. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The dog blinked once, slowly, then vanished around the corner. The farmland's messenger checking up on me, making sure I was keeping my promises. A cold chill ran down my spine, and I left my coffee half finished, suddenly eager to be back on the road. That night, unable to shake the dog sighting, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I called Sarah. Not to try to rekindle anything. That ship had sailed long ago. But to apologize. To acknowledge the burden I'd left her with. To say the words I should have said years ago. Why now? She asked, suspicion clear in her voice. I thought about the farmland, the black dog, the rules that had to be followed. But there was a deeper truth underneath all that supernatural window dressing. Because it's the right thing to do, I said simply. And I'm tired of taking the easy way out. After hanging up, I looked out my apartment window at the darkened street below. For a moment, I thought I saw the silhouette of a man in a work coat standing beneath the streetlight. But when I blinked, he was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. Just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew better. The farmland was still watching, still waiting. Not with malice, but with the patient expectation of a teacher waiting for a slow student to finally grasp the lesson. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I sat in my apartment with my laptop, searching for any information about Route 666 in Ohio, strange farmhouse, black dog, ghostly footprints. Most results were typical internet garbage, conspiracy theories, obvious fiction, blurry photos that could have been anything. But I found scattered forum posts, local newspaper clippings, first-hand accounts from travelers dating back decades. The pattern was unmistakable. People weighed down by guilt, secrets, shame. They all somehow found themselves on that isolated stretch of road, drawn to the farmland like moths to flame. Some emerged changed, others vanished without a trace. One post in particular made my blood run cold. It told of a caretaker who had once been a father consumed by guilt, trapped on the farmland until he agreed to help it claim more secrets. The author speculated that the caretaker was doomed to remain there indefinitely, a bridge between ordinary travelers and the farmland's hunger. My mind flashed to Daniel, the resignation etched into his face. Someone who couldn't find redemption in a simple phone call or confession. Maybe the farmland had multiple ways to break you. The black dog, the barn, the illusions. All part of a labyrinth designed to corner you into either healing or damning yourself further. As I was about to close my laptop, giving up on finding concrete answers, a private message popped up on the forum. The username was simply caretaker. The message contained just 2 sentences. "You're doing well, Travis. Don't make me come find you." My hands shook as I slammed the laptop closed. How had Daniel found me online? Was it really him, or just the farmland reaching out through digital tendrils? I'd never mentioned my username to anyone at the farmhouse. That night, I dreamed of the barn again, of confessions pinned to wooden beams with rusty nails. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I walked through the macabre gallery and found my driver's license still hanging where I'd left it. Only now, someone had written across it in red ink, "Paid in full." In the dream, the black dog approached, amber eyes glinting with intelligence. It sat before me, patient and expectant. I knelt, meeting its gaze. "I'm keeping my promise," I told it. "I'm trying to be better." The dog tilted its head, considering. Then, in a voice that sounded like a young girl's, it replied, "Don't stop trying. We'll be watching." I woke with tears on my face and a strange sense of both dread and comfort. The farmland would never truly release me. But maybe that was the point. Maybe we all need something watching us, holding us accountable to our better natures. Weeks turned into months. I maintained regular contact with Allie, rebuilding our relationship one awkward coffee date and movie night at a time. She told me about her classes, her friends, her part-time job at a bookstore. She even had a dog, a golden retriever named Max. Slowly, carefully, I began to trust that maybe I wasn't beyond redemption after all. One Sunday in early spring, I decided to take a road trip back to that stretch of Ohio farmland. Why would I do something so colossally stupid? Because something in me needed closure. I wanted to see if the house was still there, if the caretaker still roamed the property, if the black dog still waited for wayward travelers. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that the farmland no longer had power over me. But when I reached the coordinates, the gravel road was gone. In its place stood a tangle of overgrown weeds and brambles, as if no vehicle had passed that way in decades. No sign marked a private drive or farmhouse. The entire area looked like untouched farmland, corn growing in neat rows right where I remembered the house standing. I sat in my idling truck, confusion wrestling with relief in my chest. The wind whispered through the corn stalks, sounding suspiciously like go, go, go. I felt a strange pang of longing for that battered porch, that flickering light. As absurd as that sounds, It was as though the farmland had vanished now that I'd chosen a different path. Or maybe it was still there, disguised, waiting for some other traveler carrying a heavier burden of guilt than mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Allie. "Still on for dinner tonight? I'm making lasagna. Fair warning, I'm as bad a cook as you are." I stared at her name on the screen, a warm wave of gratitude washing over me. Yes, I was free. Free from the farmland. Free from the crushing weight of unspoken regret. For now, anyway. With a final glance at the rustling cornfield, I muttered a shaky goodbye to the place that had almost consumed me. Then I turned my truck around and headed back toward the highway, the afternoon sun warm on my face. I couldn't help imagining, just for a moment, the black dog watching from the shadows, silent approval in its amber eyes. We never truly escape our past. It follows us like a shadow, darker in some lights than others. But if we're lucky, or unlucky enough to end up on Route 666, we might learn how to face it. And that, I suppose, is the strangest rule of all. Sometimes you need a haunted piece of farmland to force you to pick up the phone and tell the people you love that you're sorry, and that you hope it's not too late. So maybe, in the end, the farmland gave me exactly what I needed. A second chance I'd been too afraid to ask for. And if that's not a lesson in cosmic irony, I don't know what is. That's the end of this story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.